you guys ever wondered some of the steps it takes to look over a timepiece and evaluate it to make sure that it's a timepiece that you should purchase? In today's video, guys, I'm going to help you guys understand what I look for and the steps that I take while I'm going over a timepiece to see whether or not I should buy it. Now, I'm going to use my Omega Constellation, to go through some of the steps. Some of the timepieces you guys might be going after may not be an Omega Constellation, but these points should still kind of apply. You guys should understand the concept and things you should look for to make sure that the timepiece is okay. So no matter if it's a Rolex you're going after, an Omega Speedmaster, a Longines, an IWC, a Patek, an AP, some of these points that I'm going to mention should be applied in trying to figure out whether or not it's a good timepiece. So guys, before I get into the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet, turn your notification on so you can know whenever I post a video, and let's just head over there so you guys can sit next to me and see what I look at before I buy a timepiece. So guys, have a seat as I go through this Omega Constellation to let you guys see what I look for to see whether or not it's a good timepiece. And the overall concept is two factors, of course, external and internal. And then there's subcategories for the external and internal. But first, obviously, we're going to look at external. So, of course, that's the outside of the timepiece. And some of the things I look for as soon as I get the timepiece in my hand is maybe I've had time before handling a timepiece like this. So I know based on the feel and the weight, how much it should weigh and how it should feel in my hand. Sometimes just immediately you could tell whether or not a watch is real or fake. So quickly getting it into your hands, you hold it like this, move up and down to see if it feels original. Some people might think that's crazy, but guys, you could put a timepiece in your hand if you handled it before and know whether or not, hey, something's off. And that's just a quick way to try and figure out whether a timepiece is original or not. So quickly, I have the timepiece in my hand. Let's just say somebody handed it to me to see whether or not I should make the purchase. I'm just going to quickly overlook it. And I'm going to hold it like this. Typically, this is the best way to hold the timepiece and handle it so that you don't drop it. I think it's like etiquette to hold a timepiece like this, especially if it's not yours and you're looking to make it as a purchase. So I'll examine the case and the bracelet, if it has a bracelet, to see whether or not it's been polished. There's two factors. There's three factors actually. It's either it's unpolished, which is perfect. It's polished, but polished correctly, which is always good, or it's polished and over polished. Now, we don't like over polished timepieces. A polished timepiece is fine. If it's polished once or twice and it's polished correctly, that's great. We want to see the original lines still there. If it has a brush finish, we want to see a brush finish. If it's a polished finish, we want to see the polished finish where that's supposed to be. So just going through the bracelet, making sure the same thing. It's brushed or polished where it's supposed to be brushed and polished. And to know these things, of course, you have to look at pictures online to know whether or not things look correctly. And I always advise you guys to go into a watch shop and look at some of these timepieces in person before you go buy it privately. So the example I'm giving you guys is especially for private sales. Again, secondary, if you're going into a dealer, you need to know these things too, because some dealers are a little bit sketchy. He ain't lying. So you do have to be cautious and look out to make sure that you don't get scammed. But for private sales, for sure, you need these tips. Now, continue to look at it externally. You need to make sure that all the parts are original. On this timepiece, it does have a bezel. I know a lot of you guys, when you think of a bezel, you think of like the Submariner bezel, the GMT bezel, but nope, this timepiece also has a bezel. It's a small, fine bezel, but it's a bezel nonetheless. Most timepieces or all timepieces have a bezel. And you need to look at the bezel to evaluate it, to make sure it's original, to make sure it doesn't have a crack, especially with this, specifically with this Omega Constellation. That's one of its weak points. A lot of people, when they remove the bezel and put it back on, they put it on incorrectly, and sometimes it snaps because it's such a small, fine bezel. So a key point that you guys need to understand is try and find, forums online to see weak points on a timepiece, whether it's the movement or just external parts, to see what to look for when you're trying to buy a timepiece. So for this timepiece, if I'm trying to buy a Omega Constellation, I'm going to make sure that the bezel isn't cracked, because sometimes it's hard to even notice it. Make sure that the crown is original. For some of these timepieces, a lot of, especially vintage, the crown gets changed. It might have an Omega symbol on it, but it's not the original crown that came with the timepiece or, supposed to be on the timepiece. luckily for me, the crown on this timepiece is the actual crown that came from the factory with this timepiece. So I'm actually grateful for that. Next, we're gonna look at the dial. We need to make sure the dial isn't refinished. Now, vintage timepieces, a lot of the points that I mentioned is gonna be really for vintage timepieces, and some would apply for modern. But looking at the dial, you don't want anything to be redone or refinished. Sure, if it is refinished, make sure that the price reflects that. But for me, I try to move away from refinished dials. So for this timepiece, it hasn't been refinished. And refinished means it's like refreshed, like they clean the dial. There's a ways to clean it where it's like professionally done, where it's like, okay, great. But for me, I don't even like a clean dial. I like the dial to be dirty, patinaed, and just original. So making sure that the writings, like let's say the constellation here or the automatic chronometer, all that writing is original. That it's not repainted. Making sure the hour markers aren't like removed and placed back incorrectly where it's crooked. Things like that you need to look for to make sure that you get the right dial on a timepiece. Also, some timepieces have loom. This one doesn't have loom. This has onyx in the hour markers and also in the hands. But if it has loom, that's a great way to see if the hands are original because it may match the hour marker looms. So, especially on vintage timepieces, they will patina. So it may get cream or yellowish on the hour markers. So make sure that the same or close to the same coloring is on the hands. So those are the things externally that I will look for. Continuing with the dial, we need to make sure that the writing on the dial is correct. So again, guys, this doesn't only apply for this Omega Constellation. This applies to any timepiece, no matter the brand or model. Make sure that the writing on the dial, the font is correct, and the actual what it says on the dial is correct. So for this, since it's an onyx dial, we need to make sure that it doesn't have Swiss made T down at the 6 o'clock, because the T, there's an actual dial with a T that does have tritium loom plots, and the actual hands is the same. So things like that you need to look for, and it's easy to overlook it during the excitement of trying to buy a timepiece or the nervousness of buying a new timepiece. So continuing along, we'll look at the bracelet. Like I mentioned before, make sure the polishing is correct, whether it's supposed to be brushed on one section or polished in another section. It's not a total deal breaker, but it should affect the price, because you could always take a bracelet to a watchmaker and have them polish it correctly, so it can look the way it's supposed to look. But yeah, for me, it's not a deal breaker, but for some people, it may be. But yeah, make sure you look at the timepiece, look at the bracelet, make sure all the etchings and the markings are correctly. Make sure the numbers and the serial numbers match the actual watch. If it's some exceptions could be made, like so if a bracelet isn't original, factory original to the actual head of the watch, but it's an original Omega bracelet, that's cool. I'll let that slide. But things to look for with even other timepieces. A good example is like the Rolex Day Date. A lot of people put aftermarket bracelets on that timepiece, and sometimes it's not 18 karat gold, sometimes it's 14 karat gold. And some people might try to sell it and pass it off as an 18 karat gold bracelet, which of course the price will be more. And there's things like that to look out for to make sure that you actually know what you're buying. In an instance like that, sure, I'll buy an aftermarket 18 karat gold bracelet on an original 18 karat gold day date, but the price needs to reflect that, hey, it's not the original bracelet. So overall, guys, when it comes to inspecting a timepiece, hold it in front of you like this. Look over the dial, because the dial is very important when it comes to a timepiece. Look at the bracelet if it has a bracelet, and make sure that everything looks correct. Now we're going to go into the internal. Now, when it comes to the internal, that's the movement and the functionality of the timepiece. And one thing I mentioned to you guys is to always take a timepiece to a watchmaker so that you could have the movement looked over to make sure it's okay. It's just like an engine of a car. You're not going to buy a car without popping the hood to make sure the oil level's good, to make sure the parts are original, to make sure the parts aren't worn out, things like that. But let's be real. There are a lot of examples and instances where you buy a timepiece without having the case back open. And there's things to look for still. The first thing is to, of course, understand through YouTube videos or forums how the watch functions and things that you need to look for on a timepiece to see whether or not the functionality and everything works correctly. So, for example, this timepiece, it has a date function and it has a quick set date function. And things like that is what you look for to make sure that the movement on the inside is the movement that it should be. So this has a push pull quick set function. Like a Rolex day date, you don't push pull, you'll just turn. But for this one, I like it. It's cool that it's just a push pull of the crown and the date would change. I'm not going to do it right now because I'll just have to go through 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 to get back to the actual date. So you guys understand though that it's a push pull and you need to make sure that you know how to make it work and function. Next, to know whether or not the movement is fine, I would just turn the hands, make sure that it's moving okay, make sure it's smooth. Next, I would wind the timepiece, make sure the winding is smooth. I'll put it to my ears. And not to say if you don't have experience, it's going to be hard to understand and figure out what you need to hear and feel. But guys, sometimes you could literally, you don't have to have any experience and know whether or not a movement on the inside needs servicing or it's just something's wrong or broken. But simply just by turning the crown, winding it, it should be smooth and no like, stoppage. And when you put it to your ears, it should have a nice, smooth, buttery sound. It all depends on the timepiece too. Not all timepieces have a nice, crunchy or smooth movement when it comes to winding the timepiece. It differs from watch to watch. So don't make that be a deal breaker because you wind the timepiece and you're hearing it a lot more than another piece. That's not a deal breaker. Just, be a little bit more cautious. And then if you do this type of examination where you don't open the case, tell the person, hey, all right, I feel a little bit iffy. Let's go to a watchmaker and have it open. The next thing I would do with a timepiece is watch the second hand and watch it sweep across the dial. Now, when you're looking over a timepiece, guys, it requires patience. So if a seller's in front of you and he's impatient and he's making you feel uncomfortable, guys, take your time. And if you got to go, just let him go or her go. But take your time, watch the timepiece, observe it, and make sure it's smooth and doesn't stop and then go again. Or you need to shake it to have it keep going. Things like that can help you understand whether or not a timepiece needs servicing, not to put a point where it's not original, but to where it needs servicing. And that should just, vary and affect the price, so it doesn't mean, oh, if a secondhand stops, hey, no, it's fake or don't buy it. That just means, hey, it needs servicing and just, adjust the price. So guys, I hope some of these points can help you out. I know with this timepiece is only a time and date function, but the same thing goes for any timepiece. It could be a chrono. If you know how a chronograph functions, test it out and make sure that everything works correctly. If you have to do it 3 times, make sure the chrono could reset and goes right back to where it should go, and it goes smoothly around the dial. Always evaluate a timepiece externally, internally. If you could open the case back, but just the points that I gave you guys was just if you can't open the case back and you're just looking at the timepiece to make sure that it's okay to buy and then possibly have to go take it in for a service. So comment down below some of the points that you guys may use or look for to evaluate a timepiece. Thanks for watching. Give the video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and guys, stay tuned for the next video.